Hello and welcome. My name is Christy Knox and today I'm going to show you how I make fruit boats. I find it to be a very interesting form and it will allow me to share some of the techniques that I use. So let's get started. To begin, I've made stamps and plates to use to create the surface design. For a boat, I need a very long slab of clay. I start by rolling it in and smoothing the surface. And then I'll stamp a pattern onto the other side. In one of my earlier videos, I show how these tools are made. Now that this side is completely decorated, I'll move the plates over and line up the slab so I can decorate the other half. Once I have it registered correctly, I will roll the clay into the plate and smooth that surface before decorating with the impressed pattern. Now that all my decoration is ready, I can start building the pot. So this is a template, a piece of cardboard that I use just to get the basic shape. I use it both for a rough cut and also for the finish cut. Templates allow me to make multiple pieces with exactly the same proportions. Now I'm ready to cut the shape of my rim. I like to cut them freehand, but I also want them to be symmetrical from side to side and front to back. So here's a little trick that I've come up with. I cut one side of this shape and flip it over, and then I can use it as a template or a guide to repeat that mirrored shape on the other side. And then I'll transfer them over to the other side of the boat. Notice my little finger. I let it ride along the table, which steadies my hand. And now the rim line is ready. I'll score the bottom and the rim. I'll set this out of the way for the moment. Always being careful that my surfaces are clean. I'm going to roll a big long coil to add to the top of the rim. I'll wet down the table surface, which is just a canvas, but it helps to keep the moisture in the coil. When I was rolling this coil the other day, I was thinking about a relationship to spinning wool. Something about the tension and the result being an even, thin rope of material. I was also thinking about making candy canes. They must have a relationship to that. When I was a kid, there was a candy store called Vriners, and they would make holiday candy canes in a million different flavors, and you could go in the back and watch them make them. Anyway, I digress. My coil is almost finished. Just want to make sure that it's even. It gets scored and slipped. Before it's attached. And whether you see it or not, whenever I'm putting two pieces of clay together, I make sure that the pieces are scored, and I just use water as a slip. The coil is tacked into place and then compressed with the use of a chamois, and then I'll go over it with my finger just to define the shape. Gets flipped And I'll take care of that seam on the other side. I'm ready to go from flat to form. When I'm connecting walls, I'll cut a bevel at a 45-degree angle on both sides. That way, when I attach the clay, the seam is the same thickness as the wall of the pot. I always hold my breath during that part. Once the seam has been slipped, I'll first just tack it lightly together, and then I'll go back in and compress that seam and finish it. And then I can start shaping the piece of clay. I'll now set this aside and let it set up a bit while I work on the bottom. I'm going to use the same pattern that I had created for the inside of the walls so that the whole interior will have one continuous pattern. Now I need to get to the bottom of this form, so in order to do that, I have to turn it over. So here's the flip. I've used a piece of foam that will help protect that beautiful rim, and a couple of lugs of clay which will support the middle. I'm going to make some tiny marks in the clay, which I'll use as guides as I'm cutting big darts to change the shape of this form. With an old X-Acto knife, I'll cut the darts. I like this knife because the blade is very thin, so there's not much resistance as it's going through the clay. It's really not that sharp. But my darts are cut and slipped and scored, and now I'm going to reconnect the walls. And then I'll cut the clay again, and these cuts will help define the shape of the bottom of the pot. Whenever I'm touching the walls of this pot while I'm building it, I have to be very careful because the surface design can get marred and smeared quite easily. So I touch it very gently, and I use as little pressure as possible. Here I'm just cutting a little divot out of the center, which will help the pot sit on small feet instead of a big flat bottom. Here I'm adding my bottom slab, just tacking it into place first, rolling it onto the walls, which compresses the clay, helps connect it, and flipping it back over. All in all, I think I flipped this piece 4 times from start to finish. Now I'm ready to do the final cut of the bottom. It's well connected. And I have this great knife that has a 90-degree bend in it, which allows me to get underneath a form as I cut it and still have a perpendicular cut. I slowed this down so that you could hopefully see the shape of it, but I have another image of it at the very end because people ask me about it all the time. So now I'm just going to roll the edge, which again helps with connection and also refining that transition between the bottom and the wall. With a wet chamois, I'll go over it again to continue to define it. And then Here's a slower image of the chamois because I wanted you to see that I hold it in tension, and so that I can make a transition line with my fingernail while also refining the roll of the edge of the bottom. Now it's flipped over one last time, and I will do small adjustments to the form and the rim. I'm getting ready for the last bit, which are the handles. So again, I wet my canvas down, and I'll roll a piece of clay that I think is about the right size. Cut it in half, that way I'll have two handles that are identical. I'll flatten it a bit. Then this is a faux finishing tool that I use to create the lines. A little decoration. And start to refine the shape of those handles so they're just not a flattened coil. I'll push this groove into the back because I can't define the front because it has a pattern on it, but I can do it on the back and then shift that shape to the front. Now I find with coiled handles, one of the issues often is there's not enough clay at the top to make a wide enough connection between the handle and the form. So I add a bit of clay, and if I'm going to add a bit of clay, I might as well make it interesting. Connect that. And then add the curve of the handle. Okay, down to the last bits. Slipping and scoring. Here I'm adding that handle. You can see that I'm using my fingers on the inside to support the pot so I can push on the outside without distorting the form. Once it's connected well, I'll just smooth it so there's a nice smooth transition between the pot and the handle. It'll look like it's growing out of the pot. Decide on the curve and the length. Add a little bit of moisture to help with the connection. Compress it and refine it. Then I'm going to add just a little detail at the bottom, which will have a relationship to the beginning of the handle. I'll add that bit. And then I'll make any final adjustments to the handle, making sure it's straight and I like the negative space. And that's it. I hope this gave you some new ideas, techniques, or inspiration to take along on your pottery journey.